Okay, so here we go, and we keep going here on the right angle cross of planning with the 3-5 profile. When you talk about the consequences of missing details, the archetype of this is the 9-3, the straw that breaks the camel's back, which I always loved as an expression. There are many camel expressions that I like. The overlooked minor element that is a frightening line, always preder- predetermines failure. When you read a line like that, always, the only difference is that the failure can be tiny, tiny, or it can be really, really big. It just depends on what that overlooked element has to be. It's a very funny reverse. I'm always fascinated by when the earth is exalted and the sun is in detriment. And you have some of these configurations, the earth's exaltation, the use of force to temporarily overcome impediments. In other words, this is one of those I missed the detail, I will just use power to push past it. And you can't. This is always the tendency in the sacral. The sacral has a very hard time when it's not self in expecting that they've made a mistake because the energy is driving them. This is the ultimate third line team, in that sense, that overlooked element. All third line beings are here not to overlook things, not to just go like things. They don't do that. They have to go in them, because if they miss something, it can be everything. And when you're dealing with the theme of the nine, which is to provide the energy for the establishment of proper pattern, if you miss something, everything that follows is going to be wrong. It's amazing how many of research processes in the advanced scientific world are projects that go on for years based on a flaw that was at the very beginning of the research that was never dealt with, and at the end of the whole thing collapses. So it's one of the things about these little details. It was my concern when I was talking about color. I got to have it, all these details, because if you miss anything, the consequences can be fast. Because from the nine, you're going to the five, you're setting the pattern. If there's something missing in the pattern, it will collapse. Details is like that lovely passenger bridge at Charles de Gaulle Airport. They left out a few little details in the original plans, and the damn thing gets built without those little details, and the things collapse. And then they say, why? How did you overlook that? So this is the calling card. When I was doing a lot of business analysis, I would come to the lines like this, and they would say, what do we do with people like this? The thing to recognize is if this being is operating correctly, properly, they're going to recognize the detail that's missing. Remember, logic can always achieve satisfaction. The straw that breaks the camel's back can also be a gift of seeing where the straw is that could break the camel's back. And this is one of the deepest potential gifts when you're dealing with the third hair, and particularly when you're dealing with the 3-5. The 3-5 for me always has the potential of being the great scientific theoretical man. 3-5s have enormous potential to be able to universalize the recognition of what's wrong. And in that gift of being able to recognize and universalize what's wrong, the potential of being able to universalize the detail that's missing that made it wrong. I always talked about trees can discover out of trial and error process, and this line is what it's all about. Most people just see as a uh-oh, but it's not. If you're operating correctly as a sacral being, it's much more difficult if you're non-sacral and you have this gate. If you're operating correctly as a sacral being, you have the potential of recognizing that that's the detail that is the missing. Everything is going to mess it up. And if you're not operating correctly, it happens to you all the time, because this is always. Because the moment that you see that the nine is rooted in collaboration, after all, it's collective. It's about sharing. There's always going to be missing details. There's always something missing. It doesn't necessarily mean what's missing at the broadcast extent of it means that anything is wrong. But you have to see that the Maya is a vast. You can't get all the detail. Like me getting all the designs and be able to do the whole thing. So the sacral that's operating correctly will recognize the details, and it will make a difference that can break the camel's back. But as we well know, waiting for somebody on the cross of planning who has a 3-5 was really going to be able to function in that way. You can see what the program wanted. The program wanted detail to be missing. Because of all the details were there, we would have been able to arrest the mutate process, and we would have been able to save ourselves a lot of grief. Would have a world in which people would be more likely to wake up than not, and so forth and so on. Details were intended to be missed. So what's interesting about giving sacrals the opportunity to abandon slavehood to the missing detail, we end up with the possibility of sacred beings being builders, because they know exactly what's been missing in the past, because they know through trial and error and what they brought in that experience in the future, or the pattern of the future. The 3-6, riding across of planning. The cross of planning is a global cycle, is slowly going out the door for us. So obviously this cross is something that is very, very powerful at this time. And again, as I go through this, always remember that the 4037 is underneath. Always see very clearly what the work of detail and the work of focus on detail through this cross is inherently. here to support the establishment and maintenance of the community. It's just us. So when you get to the 3-6, we have this dilemma that they're going to make disastrous mistake when they're young. It's why the whole thing with the 3-6 and 3 is like, wow, you've got this far, did you? And you can really see built into the 3-3 is that you're going to have this overlooked detail, and this overlooked detail can be devastating. You forgot to turn off the gas. It's amazing what kind of details can be overlooked, can be devastating in your life. So one of the things with this whole business is caution. I have a child that's a 9-3, my oldest son, and it's obvious to me with this Mercury that there are details that he misses. And yet I've begun to see that he sees details that I would miss all the time. In other words, there's this gift in his line to be able to see that missing detail is this something they have to nurture in sacred beings on this cross, and particularly this misunderstanding. But again, with 3-6s, even more than 6-3s, is because they never really get to enjoy the conscious optimism that the 3-6-3s get to enjoy. It's so much for them is about their upbringing. So much for them is about whether or not there's going to be awareness in the early part of the life. Anybody who's a 3-6 come to this knowledge is an adult who knows that they're lucky to be here and also know how difficult it is to deal with the consequences of that first part of their life. Yeah, not easy being a 3-6 or a 6-3.